My wife, as much as I love her, has a little annoying habit. And that is, if I take her advice, if I do what she suggests or what she believes is the right thing to do, she'll always say, "You see? You see?" Kind of proving that it worked, like I told you so. It doesn't bother me that much. But it's a small, minor version of something I see that's actually quite disastrous in relationships, which is being punished for good behavior, doing what your partner wants, and them actually having a negative reaction to that, or one that you perceive as negative. And that is one of the three top relationship mistakes that I'm going to be talking about today. We're going to be looking at three unusual, not often spoken about behavioral mistakes that partners often make in relationships, and why these are so dangerous and need to be stopped. One of the most important things you need to know is that the feeling of contempt, which is resentment to such a high level that you actually look down on the other person as if they're inferior to you, as if they're a burden to you. There's nothing that guarantees the end of a relationship more than the sustained feeling of contempt. So if you want to know what is it I need to do to make sure my marriage lasts and to make sure me and my partner can go the distance, the only thing you really need to think about is, how do I make sure we do not ever feel contempt towards each other? There's almost nothing else you need to worry about. So we're going to look at three mistakes that lead to contempt today that aren't often spoken about in these kinds of videos, so I thought I'd pull them out myself. 1, punishing good behavior. 2 is competing on suffering. And 3 is hostile attribution bias. So I'm going to explain what these are and what you should do about them. Punishing good behavior. As I mentioned earlier, this is where the person actually does what you want. They've done what you've asked for, maybe finally done it. They've gone with what they think is best for you. They're trying to help you, trying to make your life better. And your reaction is basically negative. It's not really gratitude. And even if it is gratitude, it's gratitude with conditions. It's gratitude that comes with a barb hidden inside it. So the person's experience is essentially one of being punished, that they do something nice and it hurts. That's the response they get. So I want you to stop and think for a second, what's the likelihood that they're going to want to repeat that behavior? Now, this happens in lots of ways. For example, asking someone to do something and they do it, but not to your exact standards, your exact specifications, usually just not to your preference. So the job is actually done to a good enough quality that you will be able to survive with the quality that it's been done to, but you'd rather it done another way, or done to an even higher, unnecessarily high quality of performance, that kind of thing. And so when they've done the work, your first response is, thanks, but, and you start picking at the nuances of imperfection within the work that they've done. I'm going to throw it out there. I don't care how much this pisses people off. This particular section, the punishing good behavior, is really, really more common in my experience of the female to the male. So it's often the male who gets punished for good behavior. The other two are actually more related to the guy. So don't think I'm being sexist here. I'm going to be harder on men than women. But this particular one, particularly that idea of, say, asking the guy to clean up the house, and he does, and it is clean enough, but then you pick out that he missed a bit of dust in the corner, or he put the clothes in the wrong drawer. You prefer them in the different drawer, you know. It's not perfect. Could be better, sure. The point is that his feedback is not positive for putting in this effort, for doing this work, for doing a task that you usually do, which means he's actually not experienced in it. He's not lazy, he's inexperienced. Maybe if he did this every week, he would eventually increase to a certain level of quality, but maybe not. You know, for example, I like to leave all the dishes to be washed at once at the end of the day, rather than washing them throughout the day. Now, I'm not saying this is the best way to do it, it's my preferred way. Now, of course, this pisses off my wife because she likes a clean kitchen all the time. But I'm not leaving the dishes out so long that it actually creates like an unhealthy living environment. It's only slightly embarrassing if guests come over. That's it. That's the most harm that my dishes methodology does. So I might do the dishes and then she might say something like, yeah, but you could have done them at lunchtime. This is what I'm talking about. Now, my wife actually doesn't do this badly, but it's an example of the guy finally does a thing, the job is actually done, everybody's still alive, everything got done to a certain standard, but You think of a different, better way it could have been done, and that's the focus of your feedback. That's a punishment, not a reward. He's now less likely, or she is less likely to do this again. Another one is acting like you've been waiting forever, like, oh, finally you did it, right? That's not a reward. That's not gratitude. That's not saying thank you. All you're really saying is that this should have been done sooner, that I've been waiting for a long time, that I've been suffering a lot. Not thank you for getting the job done. It doesn't actually matter if you've been waiting a long time and it's finally done. What matters is it is finally done. That's good. That's a good thing. That's better than it not being done. And that needs to be the focus of the feedback. Moving the goalpost. This is a horrible one. Often parents do this with kids and teachers do this with kids. Is you achieve the goal, but by the time you get there, it turns out the standards have gone higher, or that there's a new task, right? You finish sweeping up the house, and they'll be like, yeah, but the sweeping's put dust on the shelf, so now you got to clean the shelf. I just made that up off the top of my head. But this idea, like, you actually completing the task somehow creates more work. I mean, anybody who's worked a 9 to 5 in an office knows this. The more productive you are, the more they give you. That's not a reward. That's fucking punishment. And you can get this in the home environment as well. Somebody starts doing chores or doing things to help out, and then when they get done, it turns out that that means that they should now always do it, or that now that's a new job that needs to be added onto the list, or now that that completion of that work has created the need for more work to be completed. You know, you clean the fish tank, well, now we need a bigger fish tank, you got to go buy one. It doesn't stop. It's this idea like, no matter what I achieve, I'm going to be asked for more, which makes me really not want to finish anything. It's like, imagine every time you finished a plate of food that you didn't really like, they piled another whole serving on top of that. You're going to not want to finish your plate to prevent that from happening. And of course, I think the most obvious is ignoring the good and just focusing on the flaws. I kind of said that in the first example, but basically, no matter what good you do, it just gets taken for granted and you get no reward for it. You're not even acknowledged that it happened. The only feedback you get is criticism and negativity. So if you're the kind of person that the only time you give your partner feedback, it's negative, and you take anything good they do as just that they have to do it, that's just for granted, you don't get a reward for that, that's just your job, that means your partner only receives negativity from you. And studies that I saw when I was working as a manager showed that if you want someone to feel that feedback is fair, you actually need quite the opposite. You need a 5-to-1 ratio positive to negative. That for every criticism you give someone, there should be 5 recognitions of work they've done well, for them to even feel like it's fair, right? Because people are so negatively skewed in their own head due to fear. So if you want your partner to feel that your feedback is fair, you need to really be overdoing the positive, or otherwise they're going to feel like they're being nothing but criticized all the time. And being criticized all the time, not only does that create resentment in the person receiving it, but the person giving it starts to form an impression of their partner that they're useless, when actually that's not true, right? So you imagine your wife goes out, she takes the kids to school, drops off, comes home, cleans the house, prepares dinner, goes and picks up the kids, comes home, and you come home and you'll be like, oh, the dinner's a bit cold. Can you see the ratio there, right? All the stuff she did all the day doesn't count. The dinner being a bit cold is the only thing she gets feedback on. Is she going to feel like that's fair? Solution: gratitude without conditions. You should be hunting for the good that your partner does so that you can praise them for it. Now, I don't mean meaningless praise for stuff that isn't even an achievement, but rather than focusing on their flaws, focusing on what you'd prefer that isn't being done, reset your mind to look for what is being done. This is actually a more accurate way to figure out whether or not your partner's really lazy. So if you like, okay, I'm going to look at what they do, not what they don't do, or what they do that isn't to my standard, but just what they do. Now, if you find by the end of the day, fuck, they've done a lot actually. I don't ever give them recognition for this stuff, but they got the kids ready, they went to work, they ate a healthy lunch, they listened to me talk about my story, they cleaned up after themselves. There's actually heaps that they do. Then you'll see that you're the one being unfair with your criticism. But if you look and okay, I've been watching for a week now, and this motherfucker just sits around playing video games all day, doesn't even help with the kids, isn't even working hard enough to put enough food on the table, complains all the time that things aren't good enough for him, hasn't cleaned up after himself once, doesn't help me at all. Hey, maybe you've got a shit partner. But you're only going to see that if you're looking for the good and then can't find it. If you look for the good and you can find it, then you're the one who's being unfair. Number 2, competing on how much you're suffering. This is classic. This goes beyond relationships. All people do this. This thing like, I have a worse life than yours and I can prove it, and being proud of that. Right? I used to do this a lot, but I see other people do it. It just blows my mind. Like, oh, congratulations, your life sucks worse than mine. I don't know why you're happy about that. I don't know why you're so intent on proving that. You want sympathy? You want pity? You pathetic piece of shit? But people do it all the time. And nowhere does it happen more viciously than in personal relationships. A lot of the time this is happening inside the person's head. It's an imagined competition. And then the punishment for losing the competition comes out. Right? So the other partner just receives a punishment. Just receives bitterness and vitriol and passive aggressive or covert aggressive little moves, all this like jabs for stuff they don't know what they did wrong. What they don't realize is that their partner in their mind has been playing a competition, and the competition seems very unfair to them. They feel like the partner is cheating on this competition, and so they need to punish the partner. So a lot of the stuff I'm going to be talking about is just what happens inside your mind. One is weighing up who's doing more. So anytime someone's feeling tired and exhausted, stressed, and they look at their partner, they're going to go through a little calculation of who's pulling the most weight. And when you're doing that in your head, you're not sitting down on paper and giving things a value judgment or anything with the partner defending their side of the story, none of that. You're just in your head going, this is how much I do, this is how much I think they do, who's doing more. There's almost no one in the world that says, I'm the one doing less. There's almost no one in the world that has that kind of humility when they're in that space, that stressed out, frustrated, looking for someone to blame space. The truth is, I've worked with a lot of couples as a coach, and I've rarely found any where one person's doing significantly less than the other. What I do find, though, is nearly all of them think their partner is doing significantly less than themselves. And it's because of the way they imagine what's happening and because they have almost no empathy for what the other person's going through. Beating each other with pain stories. This can just look like conversation. And when you do it, you don't realize how fucking annoying you are. It's where they share something that was painful for them. And maybe you're trying to be sympathetic or show that you relate. Your reaction is to tell a story where something even worse happened to you. It's almost like you're trying to make them feel better by showing them that you feel worse. Like you're trying to give them a comparison to make them go, oh, actually, I'm fine then. Compared to you, I'm doing all right. As if that's what's going to happen. Right? I don't know why you think that would happen. That doesn't happen when it happens to you, right? Somebody beats your story, not like, whew, I feel way better, thanks for that. No, you're just mad at them for beating your story because it just diminishes what you said, it just undermines you. I see a lot of couples doing this, especially when they're in the company of other couples, a double date or in a party or something, and they'll complain in this kind of ugly, sarcastic, covert humor thing. They'll complain about how much of a hassle their partner is to them, and the other one will say, yeah, but you do this, yeah, but you do that, and that gets really kind of, ugh. And they're like trying to prove that the other person's more of a burden than they are, and so on. It can even get quite personal like that. It can just be looking for evidence that you deserve more recognition, which can be related to the first point I made, but you're not getting enough pats on the back saying you're a good boy, and so you can finally mature and stop having that arrested development where you need approval from others just to feel good about yourself. Anyway, this idea you're looking around going, look at all this stuff I've done. What did she say thank you for? She didn't say thank you for that, or that, or that, or that. This can be that love languages problem where she is actually saying thank you, just not with words. She's doing it by cooking food for you or massaging you at night or sex or something like that. But of course, you look for the evidence that you're getting enough recognition and you decide that you're not, which means you're suffering more. I think the worst one that people do is they weigh tasks as having different value. So a classic one is the guy goes and does a job, a 9 to 5, what he kind of enjoys because at the very least he feels like he's doing something valuable. He comes home, he looks at this wife in her pajamas, been looking after the kid all day, and go, that's not as hard as what I do. That's not worth as much as what I do. And I see this, I live in the Czech Republic, which is old school culturally, and I see this all the time where the guy will go work a 9 to 5 that is pretty low rent, like it's pretty easy to do. And then afterwards, he has to spend 4 hours at the pub with his mates to get over how exhausting his work is. And he comes home and goes, "Where's dinner?" kind of thing. Where's sex? And the wife's been looking after two kids all day who have been home sick from daycare. And he looks there and goes, "That's nowhere near what I do. Like, because I put money in the bank account, that trumps everything you do." There's not even a discussion about whether or not they're equally valuable. The guy thinks if I bring money in, that's more valuable than whatever it is that you're doing, pottering around the house having fun here. That's just an example of many different forms that this takes, where the person thinks, because I suffer doing what I do, it must be harder than what you're doing because you don't look like you're suffering as much as me, or you're too sensitive, and therefore this is unfair. It's kind of just unwilling to accept that they might be feeling it as much as you are. That whatever they're doing, as easy as it looks to you, is as hard for them as what you're doing. And you're not being honest about how hard your thing is. Yeah, some jobs are hard to do, but some you're just sitting around, it's actually pretty easy. It's easier to say than looking after two sick kids. And you just won't admit that. You won't admit that you actually have more energy than they do, and so on. And of course, it can just be noticed by resenting them for their joy and their relaxation. This can be the other way quite often. Like, there's a joke with husbands that you just can't sit around because you'll just immediately be given something to do. This idea that, like, the other person is doing something harmful to you if they're enjoying their life when you're not, or if they're relaxing as they should be and resting as they should be. Now, of course, there's a line here. If your partner's just slacking off and lazing around all day and their rest to work ratio is way out of proportion to yours, then yes, that is unfair and it needs to be discussed. But just because they are resting doesn't mean they're resting more than you. Just because they're resting when you're not, or when you won't even allow yourself to rest, it's not their fault. So the solution here is more intensive work where you have to regularly meet as a team. Okay, if you got kids, you put them in daycare or something and you come together. If this is a big problem, you should be doing it once a week, and then you can spread it out to more like once a month or ad hoc. But you meet as a team who has goals. Like, we are the partnership and we want a future together. It's bizarre to me how rare it is for couples to sit down and go, okay, what do we want out of our life together? And how are we going to work together to make that happen? What is our ideal? How do we find the middle where we both want the same thing? It's weird how many couples just don't even ever once have that conversation. They don't express to each other, like, what are we working on here? So once you've done that and continue to do it and adapt it over time, you should be regularly having a conversation as like, well, what's my share of the work? What's yours? What's you doing what you're good at, and what's me doing what I'm good at that contributes to the whole? What would feel fair? If I'm doing this work and you're doing that work, is that equal? Should you be doing more? Should I be doing less? So on. Have that conversation until you come to the end of it going, okay, that is fair. No matter how we feel about it, we know that that's fair. And if either of us ever feels like it's not, we need to come back and have another conversation. No punishing, no resenting, no little passive aggressive comments. We come together and talk about, go, that feels unfair again. Let's have a look. Whenever I feel things are unfair between me and my wife, we have a conversation, and 9 times out of 10, I end up going, actually, it's unfair the other way. Because when I hear what she's going through and actually have some empathy and get out of my own head for a bit, I realize I'm resting more than she is. I'm enjoying life more than she is. She's struggling more than I am. And that helps me realize that just because I'm suffering doesn't mean that she isn't. And that sometimes, even if I am suffering, I still need to add more to my work life because we've got a hard life. We're raising a 2-year-old. We don't have much support. So as hard as it feels for me, it might even still be harder for her, in which case I'm going to have to dial things up. And I'm happy to do that as long as I realize that that's fair. And the way I realize it's fair is by having that conversation with her. By the way, get in touch if you want more support with your relationship and with the communication tools that will ensure that you have a healthy relationship. I'll send you through a free PDF that I've put together on really quite advanced relationship communication tips. Okay, final big mistake, number 3, hostile attribution bias. I only just discovered this term a little while ago. I used to call it the assumption of malicious intent. Hostile attribution bias is a cognitive bias where you believe that the other person's intent is to harm you. So you believe whatever they're doing is a deliberate move to cause you some sort of suffering, right? It's a kind of paranoia that things are against you. Now, some people have this with everyone all the time, a kind of trauma reaction where they're just distrustful of the world. And a lot of people have it in a relationship where your partner does something that you don't like or just not prefer. You'll assume that they purposely did that to aggravate you, provoke you, hurt you in some way. Now, of course, sometimes this is true, and if you're in a relationship with a narcissistic personality, then it's always true. But for the most part, you're wrong. While sometimes your partner might lash out at you on purpose, even then, when they sit back in the cold light of day, they don't want you to experience harm. They don't want you to suffer. They love you. Just in that moment, they lashed out because they believed that that was the right thing to do. But even those moments are actually a lot rarer than you think they are. A lot of the times when your partner does something that seems to be a deliberate infliction of suffering on you, you've misunderstood it. That's not what it was, or at least that was not the primary motive. A classic one is just taking what they do personally. Assuming everything's about you, you special little angel. Eh? Isn't it? Eh? Everything about you? Because you're so awesome? The whole world's centered on you, and every decision everyone makes is because of you in some way, right? You're just that significant. Or maybe you're taking things personally that got fucking nothing to do with you. You know, classic one for guys is once a month. Am I right, fellas? The missus starts to be maybe a little unfair, maybe a little mean, maybe a little fucking cruel. And you take it personally, like she's trying to hurt me, like she's being too critical. This is unfair on me. Rather than like, oh, wait, yeah, this happens every month at a very specific time for a very specific reason. And she's like this with everybody. And then when it goes away, she's not like that anymore. And maybe if I didn't fucking react to it, it wouldn't be a big deal, right? It's one of the weirdest pieces of advice I give that women hate, but it works. And that is, when your girl's on the rags, don't take anything she says seriously. Yeah, just don't. For 3 days or whatever it is, 2 or 3 days, you know that time. Whatever she says, do not follow it up. Do not try to solve it. Nothing. She says, our relationship's a disaster. Just go, all right, fair enough. We'll talk about it in 2 days' time. We'll see how much of a disaster it actually is. If you react to it, if you take it seriously, you make it bigger than it is. That aside, this course goes both ways. I mean, guys just take things personally all the time. And guys will take it as like an attack quite often, and they'll try to defend themselves. Girls will take it as like a personal criticism, and they'll think they have to change themselves. This being very generalizing, of course, it can go the other way around. But generally, like your partner does something and you think it's about you. You know, they start trying to eat healthy and you think that they're commenting on your weight, right? They start hanging out with their friends more and you think that they don't find you interesting anymore. It's kind of thing like no matter what they do, it's about you. That's a classic sign of hostile attribution bias, like everything they do is designed to somehow hurt you. You'll notice that you work hard to perceive something as an attack. Like you have to tell yourself the story that makes you the victim of their behavior. You know, you come home and the dishes weren't clean like she said she would. You think, you know what? This is probably because yesterday I said that thing and now she's trying to get back at me. And you tell yourself this big story to turn her forgetting to do the dishes into a deliberate swipe against you. And you'll do that every time she forgets to do dishes. And now you've got a pattern. Like, she punishes me by not doing dishes. Not once have you talked this through with her. This is all happening in your fucking imagination. And now you've got this like clear case, like, oh yeah, when my partner's mad at me, she does this thing where she doesn't do the dishes. And you go tell your mates about it and they'll all commiserate. And at no point in time have you gone like, hey, does she just forget to do the dishes sometimes? Or am I supposed to be the one doing the dishes? You don't have this fucking consideration that there could be another reason. Your first guess was that she's trying to hurt you. You didn't even like play with any other guesses. Like maybe she forgot, maybe it's my turn to do the dishes, maybe the dishes aren't that big a deal. Maybe your fucking friend just stopped talking to her for no reason. She's absent-minded because of the grief. Nothing. No other consideration, just trying to attack me. And I will spin whatever tale I need to tell myself to prove that that's true. And I'll do this over and over again until it looks like a pattern of behavior. And then I really believe it. I won't talk about it with her, though. It's too much of a hassle. Don't need to. I already know it's true. You start to ignore obvious clues that maybe you're being too sensitive, that maybe this isn't about you, that even when it is about you, it's really their insecurities, and they always do this with anyone that they feel close to when they feel like that. And still not about you, really. Sometimes, I don't know, my partner might slip a little bit and kind of guilt trip to get me to do something rather than asking directly, which she'll usually fix right away and go and just ask for it. But her whole family does that. She's learned to do that. She was doing that before I came around. That's not about me, that little quirk of behavior, right? Or I can be manipulative sometimes where, in order to get something done, I'll talk about all the ramifications of it not being done. It's a little indirect move that I catch myself doing sometimes. I'll be like, if this doesn't get done, we'll have to do this, make it sound like a big hassle. It's kind of like motivate someone to get the thing done to avoid all this pain. It's not about my wife, me doing that. That's not something she causes me to do. I've been doing that since I was young. I managed to catch it most of the time now, but it's got nothing to do with her. That's not me trying to hurt her. That's me having a inferior way of getting my needs met. Another one is treating every good deed with suspicion, which relates again to the first point. But every husband knows at the time where they try to do something nice and all they got back is, why did you do this? Do you really mean it? This kind of idea that you've got hidden motives for everything you do, that you can't ever just be doing something for a nice reason. Why'd you give me flowers? Did you actually want to give me flowers, or you just do it because Fred does it for his girlfriend? It's like, Jesus Christ, I actually just proud of myself for remembering for once. So you don't even like flowers. Why would you get them for me? It's like, because you like them. Jesus Christ, how complicated is this? This happens quite often. It goes the other way as well, where you can't be trusted that you actually want to do a good deed. You can't be trusted that you'd have the motive of improving their life and nothing more. Now, some people can't be trusted. I mean, one of the reasons I work with nice guys is a lot of the nice things they do is covert contracts. There's actually a reward they expect for it. They don't just give freely. It's one of the main pieces of coaching work I do is teaching them how to give freely. But the thing is, a person can't learn to give freely if they're suspected all the time, if they're punished all the time, if it seems that their partner is paranoid about their motives all the time. It will make them doubt their own motives. It's a form of gaslighting, really. If you constantly try to convince the person that they don't have good motives, they'll start to believe you, and then you're in real trouble. So the solution is to kind of go the opposite, the optimistic attribution bias, which is assume they have a good reason for everything they do. Now, by good reason, I don't mean that you agree with the reason or that it's even healthy. What I mean is it makes sense to them. Whatever it is they've done or why they've done it makes total sense for them, even if it doesn't to you. And so if you can get in touch with that reasoning, you'll often see that firstly, it's not about you, and secondly, it's not actually something you need to worry about. It's not really a threat. This isn't a hostile thing happening here. Even if it's an unhealthy piece of behavior, even if it's just an annoying piece of behavior, it's not your preference, it doesn't mean there's actually anything that needs to be fixed here. Once you understand that they've got this reason for why they do things, once my wife understands that I leave my dishes till the end because it's the least amount of work to do them all at once and do them in patches, she realizes I'm not attacking her with dishes, and I'm not lazy, actually. This is me just trying to be efficient. Doesn't mean it's the best way to do dishes. It's just my way, and I've got a reason for it being my way. So your best bet, find out why. What is their reason? Try to get to the point where you go, oh, okay, is that why you do it? And then you'll see that, your contempt and your resentment was unfounded. Get in touch if you want any more relationship support, confidence building, especially if you're a nice guy in a relationship. And of course, I'll send you my free PDF with relationship tips. There's real shit in there. It's not just one of those bullshit marketing ones. It's got some good stuff there. And I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.